Hello everyone and welcome to Code with Beto. In this video we are going to learn how to create a real-time chat application using React Native and Firebase as a backend. As you can see, we have the demo of what we are going to be building today. We have authentication so we can log in into our application. If I press this chat icon, we're going to be in this beautiful design chat application, and the design is provided for this package called gifted chat, and it's very similar to the messaging application for iOS devices, the native messaging app, and we can send a test message as you can see right there. Of course, we have stored all these messages in Firebase. We can sign out as well, and if we try to sign in with the wrong credentials, we are gonna get this Firebase error that says that the email is invalid, of course, and we are gonna get the same error if we try to sign up with the wrong email. All right, so now let's test this with another device just to see that we have the real-time functionality working properly. I'm gonna log into these two different accounts that I have, and if we go to the chat screen on both devices, and if I send a message from the iPhone SE from the left side, we can say hello from iPhone SE. As you can see on the right side, we get the message instantly, which is pretty nice. And this functionality is super cool, and you can integrate it in your application super easily, as you can see through this tutorial. All right, and if I reply from the right side, you can see in the left side we got the message. And please don't pay attention to the pictures, those are random pictures. You can change that, of course. This design was provided by Eco Development Studios. Eco Studios, it's a digital development studio that can help you with your projects, design, and you can go to their website. I'm gonna leave it down here in the description. And if you are interested on them, and if you need, of course, a design or something, please go to their page. Now let's start with this tutorial. We are going to start by creating the project, and the first thing that I want to do is to move this phone to the right and bring my terminal. So I'm going to use my iTerm that I have here. First thing, we are going to init a new project using Expo, so we can run Expo init chat app. We are going to choose the blank template, and let's wait until the dependencies are installed. Once that's done, we can access to the carpet that we just created and open that on Visual Studio by running code dot. Once we have our project open in Visual Studio, we can run our application just by typing expo start. All right, we can open this application on iOS by pressing I. And as you can see, our app is running just like that. Now let's start by installing dependencies. The dependencies that we're going to be using, it's going to be navigation, because we want navigation in our application. So I'm going to say yarn add React Native, React Navigation, Stack Navigation specifically, and React Native Gifted Chat. Once that's installed, we're also going to need some more dependencies, because we're going to be using Firebase. Remember, we're going to need expo constants just to keep our keys secret. If you're going to be uploading this to GitHub, we're going to be using expo constants, as well as .amp, React Native gesture handler, and React Native screens, React Native safe area context, and lastly, mask view. And these dependencies are pretty much just to have the navigation and Firebase dependencies working properly. That's why we need to install all these dependencies. But yeah, so hit enter, and once these things are installed, let's create a Firebase project. So I'm gonna go here to Firebase console, and in this console we can start by creating an account if you don't have one already. I already have my account, so I'm just gonna go directly to my console. Here, as you can see, I have this chat app. already, but you can create a new project by pressing add project right here. Now let's give it a name. This project, of course, you can name it whatever you want. For this tutorial, I'm gonna say chat apps tutorial and hit continue. I'm gonna just turn off Google Analytics for this project. You can leave it on if you want. And after that, we can press create project. This is gonna take a couple of seconds. Let's wait for that. And there we go. It's ready, and we can start integrating authentication. We can start saving messages and all that. All right. Make sure that you are in this project that you just created. And now that you are here, you can just go to the left side and choose authentication, for example, and let's enable authentication for this project. We just have to press get started. And here we can choose a provider or a sign-in method for our application. As you can see, we have many providers, but for this tutorial, we're gonna be, for the sake of this tutorial, we are just gonna be using password and email. So I'm gonna enable this. And basically here we have a basic description that says that this is gonna allow users to authenticate with email and password, all right? Here we can send an email to allow passwordless sign-in as well. But for this tutorial, we're gonna be just leaving the email just like that, right? So I'm gonna hit save for now. Let's wait a second, and that's it. We have enabled email and password. Now we can connect our React Native application to this backend project that we just created. We are going to go to project settings. In here, we can simply scroll down. And because we are using React Native for this project, we need to connect like it was web, for example, right? Because we have these options for iOS, Android native, but we are gonna be using web. So let's press web and register our application, right? Here, you need to put a name for your application. I'm just gonna say my, for example, I don't know, my chat app, and hit register app, all right? Now, after a second, we're gonna get this configuration that we need to connect our React Native application to this backend. So be careful, guys. Don't share these keys with anyone because they can use them in their project and you are gonna be charged for whatever they use. All right. For this tutorial, of course, I don't care if you see them, but be careful, especially if you are gonna upload this application or this project to GitHub. Okay, so now that we have the configuration that we need, we can go back to our project and connect the React Native app to this backend. One way to keep your keys secure is using environment variables. So in this project, I'm gonna create a new file, .env, and here we can place all the keys that we got from Firebase. All right, so you can just replace whatever you have in your project for each key. Once we have these keys, I'm gonna change my app.json and I'm gonna rename it to be app.config.js. So just delete the .json and add .config.js. All right, so we're gonna do this in order to use the environment variables that we just create. So I'm gonna import up here .env. Remember that we installed .env at the beginning of this video in our dependencies. So import .env/config, and in this object that we have here, we can export the default. And down here, we are gonna add the environment variables that we just created. So let's first start by saying export default, and down here, we're gonna paste these extra variables, accessing them using process.env, .appkey, .outdomain, etc. All right. Once we have that, we can create a folder called config, and inside this folder config, we are going to connect our application to Firebase. So I'm going to call this file firebase.js. Here we're going to initialize the application. Remember that we already installed Firebase, so we're going to import that from Firebase. And check or pay attention here in the Firebase config, we are bringing all our configuration from the constants.manifest.extra.name of the key, in this case API key, auth domain, project ID, and all the variables that you pasted in your app config.js, right? Finally, we have to initialize the Firebase application. Initialize, we pass the configuration Firebase config, as you can see down here, and we are going to be using the database and the authentication. That's why we are exporting authentication and database, and we are importing as well the methods getAuth and getFirestore. Now let's start with the Firestore database. I'm going to go back to my project here in Firebase. I'm going to click continue to console here, and here in the console we can go to the left sidebar and hit Cloud Firestore, and let's create a database for this project. So I'm going to click here, and here it comes an important thing. You can start your database in production mode. For the simplicity of this tutorial, we are going to start this in test mode. The default security rules for test mode allow anyone with your database reference to view, edit, and delete, so you have to be careful, right? And of course, that's only for 30 days. If you are ready to be in production, you can just select this, the first option, but in this tutorial, we're gonna go easy with start in test mode. Now we can continue. And here, something important, after you set this location, you cannot change it later. So I would recommend that you choose the location that is more close to where are you located. In this case, I'm gonna just use the default that we have here, that is US Central. Once you have the region for your database, you can click enable. Now we have to wait some seconds until this is finishing setting up. Once that's done, we're gonna get this screen, and you can do more configuration, but you don't need to do anything. We can just start writing some data in our database. So let's go back to our project, and let's start by creating the navigation and screens that we're gonna be using for this application. I'm gonna start by creating a folder called screens. Inside this folder, I'm going to create a file for each screen that we are going to have. So we're going to need a screen for the chat, and we're going to need a screen for the home screen. So I'm going to call it home.js. Once we have our screens, we can create another one for the login screen, of course, and I'm going to create another one for the sign up screen. Of course, I'm not gonna be adding like a forget password or reset password or something like that. We're gonna be, for the simplicity of this tutorial, we're gonna be using just sign up and login. Now let's start working in our chat. We're going to start by importing React from React and give the chat. That's another dependency that we installed at the beginning of this video, and this is going to help us to create the chat super easily. Let's export default this component. I'm going to call it chat just like that, and return. We are going to return gifted chat. Perfect. Now let's go to our app.js. We can delete these styles. We are not going to be using them, and this default text that we have here. All right, I'm going to delete these imports that we don't need. I'm going to import React from React and import navigation container from React Navigation Native. As well, we're going to need to create a stack navigator, so we need to import a stack navigator from React navigation stack. And finally, I'm going to import my screen chat. So in here in this app component, we are going to manage the authentication of our application. So here is the perfect place to create our navigation, and then depending on the authentication of the user, we can send them to the login screen or the chat screen if it's already authenticated. So let's create a stack saying const stack equal to create stack navigator. Down here, I'm going to create a component for my stack, my chat stack. I'm going to call it chat stack. And this component is going to return stack.navigator, a stack.navigator. And inside this stack.navigator, we are going to have just the chat screen like this. We have to specify the component. Remember that we are importing it up here. Now that we have the chat stack, down here I'm going to create another component that is going to contain my root navigation, and I'm going to call it root navigator. Inside this root navigator, we need to place our chat stack, and if you want to add more navigation, you can add it here inside this navigation container. Now this app can return this root navigator if the user is authenticated, and if the user is not authenticated, we can send the user to the authentication screen. All right, so now we have the root navigator just like that, and we can start the project again just to see if this is working. I'm gonna say expo start, right? I'm going to refresh my iPhone here to the right. If we press Command Control C, we can open the tools and then reload the application. All right, so it seems that it's working. We can see that we have the chat, and we have this input because we are using the gifted chat library for this screen. Now we can just start using it just like that. We don't need to do anything. We don't need to create an input, nothing. Just add the component, and that's all we need. Perfect. So now we need to add the authentication, right? We don't want the users just to come here to the chat. So in order to do that, I'm going to create another, I'm going to bring my assets for my authentication screens, my login and sign up. So I'm just going to drag and drop this back image that I have from my design. Remember that you can get this design and code if you go to codewithbeto.dev/project. You can search for chat app and you're gonna find this project. You can download if you want it, and just copy the images if you want to use it like that, or you can just clone the design. All right, so for the login screen, I'm going to import React, use state, a bunch of things of React Native like text, view, bottom, text input, sign in with email and password. That's very important, and we are importing that from Firebase authentication. And auth, remember that when we create our configuration here in Firebase, we export as a const auth, so we can import that auth here inside of our login. And we can import as well our back image. That's the one that I just drag and dropped. Perfect. Now that we have all we need for this login screen, I'm going to export this component default as well, and I'm going to call it login, and I'm going to delete, well, I'm going to leave this navigation just like that. We're going to use navigation here so we can extract that from the properties. Now I'm creating here two variables using use state. The first one is going to be for the email, and the second one is going to hold the password. And I'm creating a onHandle login. This function is going to help us to authenticate the user with the email and password, and check that we are passing the authentication from our configuration. That's one of the parameters, email and password. And this signing with email and password, we are importing this method from Firebase authentication. This is a promise, so we can say then whatever we want to do after the user is authenticated. For example, here we are saying console log login success, and then .catch in the case that we have an error, we can just put an alert that says login error and show the error to the user. Finally, I'm going to create my return inside this component login, and for the return we are going to create the inputs and the text for the screen, right? So I'm just gonna paste these styles that I already have here. Pretty much simple styles, just one for the container, the title, subtitle, the image, white sheet, and you're gonna see how that looks in a moment. Let's first start by creating a view inside this return. Let's start with our image. I'm gonna use this back image that we are importing up here, and I'm going to add the container style in this view that we have down here, right? Note that I'm adding the style back image to the image. Now we can't see this now because we are just rendering the chat inside our app component. So let's start by importing this login screen. Now, just to see how the login screen looks, I'm going to change this screen for login, for my component login. And if I hit save, we can see that we have the image that we are working on here in this login component. So let's just leave that like that for now, just to see what's going on with our style. And let's finish this screen. I'm going to say view, styles, and I'm going to add the style white sheet. This white sheet, what it's doing is just creating this nice rounded view background, and it's this design, it's this class that we have down here. All right, so now inside this view we want to create a save area view, and inside this save area view I'm going to create a text that says login, adding the style title. Let's create another text with the style title as well that says password. Perfect, it's looking good, it's working. Now let's add the style for this save area view that says form. This is gonna put the text down here, and now I'm gonna delete this password for now and just paste this text input that I already have here. As you can see, just basic text inputs from React Native. I'm adding the styles.input for each one of those. And the important thing here is that we have these settings that says auto capitalize, none, keyboard type, email address, and for example in the password we have the secure text entry equal to true. We are adding the value of the variables that we are declaring up here using useState from React, and on change we are updating those same variables. That's basically all we need. If I hit save now, we can see that we have these nice text inputs and the login, just like that. Now we need a button to activate or to log in whenever the user is ready to log in. So for that, I'm going to use touchable opacity. I'm going to add the style.button to this touchable opacity, and on press, I'm adding the onHandle login, which is this function that we create up here. The text is just a simple text that says login, and the button looks like this. In this case, we need another button to navigate to the sign up screen. So we can simply duplicate this touchable opacity, or we can create another different style if you prefer. But for the simplicity of this tutorial, I'm just going to create this touchable opacity that says sign up, like this. We are asking if you don't have an account, and then we are creating a touchable opacity, and inside this touchable opacity we are putting sign up in orange, right? Perfect. So now if we sign up, we should navigate to the screen sign up. As you can see here, navigation.navigate sign up. But of course, we need to make some configurations to our navigation in order for this to work. So in this chat stack, I'm gonna set screen options equal to header shown false. Now we have this nice view. Perfect. Now I'm gonna create another screen or import my sign up screen. And just to see how it's going to look, I'm going to do the same thing that we are doing. Just change this for sign up, and we can hit save. But first we need to add something here in sign up. So I'm just going to paste pretty much the same thing that we have in our login screen. Same image, same everything, just changing the text for sign up, and instead of signing with email, we are creating user with email and password from Firebase authentication. Important thing as well, we are changing the method, creating user with email and password. This function receives the same parameters, which is the authentication from Firebase, email and password. And we are just making a simple check if the email is different than empty string and the password is different than an empty string, right? Everything else, it's pretty much the same thing. We are checking if we sign up success, we are going to put that in the console. Otherwise, if we have an error, we're going to put an alert with the error. Change the text, add the function to the button sign up, and this login, in this case we want to navigate to the login screen because we are in the create account, right, in the sign up screen. Perfect. So now we can see that our screen is looking good. Once that's ready, I'm going to import my home screen as well, and this is the time when we validate if we send the user to the home screen or if we send the user to the sign up screen, right? So in my home screen, I'm just going to paste this very simple component. I'm using this cat image for my header, and I'm basically changing my header here in this use effect using navigation.setOptions, the hook navigation. And for the header left, I'm using a font awesome, and for my header right, I'm using my image of the cat. All right. So now we just have to return this touchable opacity, which is just a button, which is gonna take us to the chat screen. And we are using this icon and typo for the chat icon. As you can see, pretty simple styles down here. You can pause the video and copy those styles if you want. I'm gonna create another file for my colors. I'm gonna call it colors.js, and inside this colors.js, I'm going to paste this color that we are gonna be using for this design. All right, as you can see, it's just a primary gray, medium gray, and light gray. When I hit save, let's go back to our home screen, and we are using these colors here. So let's import them, and we are using these colors in the font awesome icon and the text. Perfect. So now let's start by creating the navigation flow. Back in our app component, here is where we want to check if the user is authenticated or not. Okay, so let's start by importing a view from React Native and activity indicator. Here we're going to use another method from Firebase, which is called onAuthenticationChange. Basically, it's a trigger that is going to let us know whenever the authentication or the state of the authentication of the current user changes. It's called onAuthStateChange from Firebase Authentication, as you can see. And that's pretty much all we need to create this functionality. I'm going to create authentication context so we know whenever the user is authenticated, no matter in which screen we are. And I'm going to create a context using React context, the hook create context, called authenticated user context, right? Just like that. Now, after we created our authenticated user context, we can provide this context or use this context to save the authentication, to create the authentication provider, right? So I'm going to say authenticated user provider is going to take a children, and inside here we want to keep the information of the current authenticated user, right? So I'm going to return just a very simple component that is going to wrap with the authenticated user context provider the children or whatever component that we want, to have access to the user. We are going to pass the value, which is going to be an array. We're going to pass the user and set user functions like this, which is an object, sorry. And inside we're going to place the children. We're going to close our component just like that. And we can just close this authenticated user provider context. Now we can use this context to check if we have a user or not. Perfect. So let's go down here into our chat stack, for example, and change this stack screen to be home. And after that, we're going to add the chat screen because we want to navigate from home to chat, right? So we need to add that to the chat stack. And in this case, we want to see the header of the screens, right? Let's just define the default screen options to be home, so we get to the home screen whenever we sign in or whenever we navigate to the chat stack. The home screen is going to be the first screen that we're going to see, and then from there we can navigate to the chat screen. Perfect. Now we can create another stack navigation, which is going to contain my authentication, my auth screens. I'm going to call it auth stack, and we can simply copy all the chat stack that we have up there and just change the screens as well as the default screen. In this case, the auth default is going to be sign in, which is login, sorry. And now let's say start screen equal to login and stack screen equal to sign up. Those are the two screens that we are going to be using for our authentication. And now that we have these two stacks containers, we can simply jump between them depending on the user authentication state. So we can use the context authenticated user context like this using the hook use context, and we are extracting the user and the set user function that we are providing as value in this context. So now, as you can see up here, this is our context. So now we can simply use the information of the context to see if we have a user or not. Now, let's say loading, set loading, use state equal to true, because at the beginning we want to check if we have a user or not. And while we are checking, we need to provide some feedback to the user. So we are going to say that it's loading, right? So now in this use effect, we can check or subscribe to the event whenever the user changed the authentication state on auth state change. As you can see, we need to provide the authentication as well as pretty much same thing that we did with the auth like this in our screens authentication. So let's pass the authentication, and this is going to return an observer, right? This is going to be a callback function called async authenticated like this. Perfect. And this is going to let us know if we have an authenticated user or not. In the case that we have an authenticated user, we're going to set the context of the user equal to the authenticated user information that we are receiving here in this subscriber. Otherwise, if we don't have anything in the authenticated user, we are going to set the user to be null, like this. After that, we're going to set loading equal to false, because remember that we initialized it to be true. So whenever we finish checking if there's a user or not, we're going to set loading equal to false. Now we can close this use effect. One important thing, guys, it's to clean up, saying return unsubscribe, like this. This is a function cleanup. Whenever the component is unmounted, it's gonna delete this subscriber function. Now, another important thing is to add this array of dependencies in this use effect. Add the user, because we want just to run this use effect whenever the user changes or the first time the component mounts. If you don't add this array, you're gonna end up using all your you're gonna end up making a lot of calls to the database, and it's gonna cost you a lot of money. Okay, so now if it's loading, we are going to return we want to return the activity indicator saying that it's loading, right? And now in this return, we can simply check if we have a user. We are going to send the user to the chat stack. Otherwise, if we don't have a user authenticated, we're going to send the current user to the sign up screen. So I'm going to say user. In the case that we have a user, we're going to send them to the chat stack, otherwise out stack. So that is going to look something like this. I'm going to delete this, and this it's looking good. I think this should be working at this point. And basically the only thing that we're doing is just using the authenticated user provider. All right, okay, here we are not using this authenticated user provider. So in order for this to work, we need to add this provider to our root application, right? So we just need to wrap this app with the context. So we can say here return, and we can add the authenticated user provider. This way we secure that everything that we are using from the context inside the root navigator is going to be accessible, because we are using this provider, right? We are wrapping the root navigator inside this provider. Now, if I save this, I'm going to get this error because I forgot to return this out stack. So we can just simply add the return inside this authentication stack and hit save. As you can see, it's working at this point. Now we need to hide the header in the authentication stack, right? We can go back here to the stack navigator and say screen options. And inside here, we can say header shown equal to false. We can navigate from screen to screen and from sign up to login. Perfect. Now, we are going here because we don't have a user at this point, right? So we need to register a user. So I'm going to create a user called test@outlook.com. I'm going to create a password and press sign up. All right. If you see the console down here, we can see that says sign up success, which means that we already authenticated a user. That easy. So that's why we are now in the chat stack of the navigation. What we did was create a new user with email and password. As you can see here, this method, we pass the authentication, we pass the email, we pass the password, and then the subscriber, this function subscriber on out state change triggered a change. That's why we set the user to be the current authenticated user, and that's why we are no longer seeing the sign up screen, but instead we are seeing the chat stack screen. Now we can go back to the Cloud Firestore, or the authentication in the Firebase console, and you can see that we have this user authenticated. It has a user UID, and you can see as well the provider, in this case email. Now we can move forward to add the Firebase data or the messages. All right, so I'm gonna create another, I'm gonna open another simulator just so we can see what's going on. And in this device, I'm gonna create another account. So let's wait a little bit until this is finished loading. Don't worry too much about this warning. It's Firebase package warning. Anyway, so let's create, or let's try to sign in, and we are gonna get this error. Let's try to sign up. I'm gonna use my email, betomoedano@outlook.com. Sign up. Let's wait for a little bit, and as you can see, sign up success. We can of course add another loading screen because that was like we don't know what's going on for a couple of seconds. But if we go back to the Firebase console, you can see that we have the betomoedano user that we just created. Perfect. So now we have two users using this application, and the authentication is working properly. Now we only need to add the messaging functionality. That is going to be the last thing that we're going to be doing, and as you are going to see, it's going to be super easy. Okay, so we are going to go back to the chat screen, and in this component we are going to start by importing all the things that we are going to need in order to create or in order to write in the database of Firebase. We're going to be using a bunch of hooks from React: use callback, use layout effect, use effect. And if you are not familiar with these hooks, don't worry. Even it's super easy. You can just see here making hover, for example, in use layout effect. It's a signature, it's identical to use effect, but this use layout effect, it's gonna help us to run code before we render something into the screen. You're gonna see why we need this in a moment. Pretty much all the time we use this is for rendering stuff like rendering a header or something like that. Another hook that is not very famous is the hook use callback. This hook help us with returning a memorized value so that we don't have to compute the same expensive function twice. And we're going to be using as well from Firebase FIRESTORE, collection, add doc, order by, query, and on snapshot. And you're going to see why we are going to be using this in a moment. But of course, if you hover over these properties, you can see what it does. For example, document snapshot triggers events, which is going to help us to refresh the screen whenever we get a new message. All right, we're going to need authentication as well. We're going to need database from our configuration, from our Firebase configuration file. We're going to use navigation. We're going to use as well sign up from Firebase, and a couple of icons and the colors that we defined at the beginning. Now let's start inside this component by creating a messages array using useState from React. Now let's initialize the navigation hook, saying const navigation equal to use navigation. Down here, I'm going to create a function called onSignOut, and here we can simply say sign out, passing the authentication from Firebase. And in the case we have an error, we can say .catch and put that error on console. And now we need to render a button in order to see to add the onSignOut function, right? So that's why we're going to be using the use layout effect. We're going to change the header of this screen in specific. So let's say it's pretty much the same thing as use effect from React, but it's gonna render whatever we put inside before we show anything to the user. So I'm gonna use the hook navigation to set the options from this for this header. And this header right is gonna be a touchable opacity. This is just a simple icon that I'm importing from &design. And whenever the user press this icon, we are going to sign out the user. This use layout effect is going to take an array of dependencies as a second parameter, as you can see, and we are going to add the navigation to that array. Whenever we change navigation, we want to render this use layout effect. And once a component is mounted as well, we want to run this use layout effect. Now we are going to be using a use layout effect as well. And this use layout effect, we can have many use layout effects, by the way. This use layout effect is going to help us to reference the collection of data from our Firebase FIRESTORE. So we're going to be using this collection method that we are importing from Firebase. So let's say collection, and as you can see here, this is the instance of the reference of the collection of the specific Firebase backend, right? Specific database. So that's why we need to pass this database config that we are importing from our Firebase config file. Now let's pass the name for the collection. Because we don't have any collection at this point, we can just simply write one, and if we don't have that already saved in our Firebase console, Firebase automatically is gonna try to take it from there. All right. So now let's declare a query. I'm gonna say const q equal to query. We need to pass the collection reference to this query. And now we can specify things like order by. In this case, we're gonna order all the messages by the date that they were created. And as well, we're gonna order them in descending order. As you can see here, as a second parameter, we're saying created at descending order. Perfect. And this is gonna run before we show anything to the user as well. All right. So const unsubscribe. We need to unsubscribe. We're gonna be using on snapshot, that is basically a listener. It's an observer. Whenever we have something new in this query or this collection, we can do something. We can run some logic. So inside this function, I'm gonna say console log snapshot, and we can put in the console whatever we want. I'm just gonna say snapshot at this point, and I'm gonna set my messages, because whenever this runs, it means that someone sent a message, so we can update our messages. The messages is gonna come inside this snapshot variable that we have here. So we can simply say snapshot.docs.map. This is gonna be an array, and for each doc, for each message that we are receiving, we can do whatever we want with this data. The structure of this snapshot is gonna look like this. It's gonna have an ID, and we can simply add this to be doc.id, created at, and this format that I'm creating here, like underscore ID created at, it has to be like that in order to pass it to the gifted chat, because the gifted chat needs this data to have this specific format. So that's why we need to add it like this, right? So now that we have these messages in this specific data structure, we can pass it to the gifted chat, and the gifted chat is gonna use it just like that. We don't need to do anything, just pass the array of messages, but with this specific structure, which is underscore ID created at text and user. As you can see, we are getting all those data from the doc that we are getting from the snapshot, and we are running this use layout effect just once. Of course, don't remember to unsubscribe. And if I hit save now, I'm gonna get this error because I don't know why I'm gonna just leave that error for now, and I'm gonna create another function which is gonna be called onSend. OnSend, we're gonna use callback, and this is gonna help us to memorize the messages that we already had, so we don't have to re-render or compute everything every time we send a message, right? We're just gonna add this message to the messages by saying set messages and updating right away the state by accessing the previous messages like this, and then accessing to giftedchat.append. Giftedchat has this method called append, and we can append data. In this case, it's just one message that we are sending in this case, in this function. So we pass the previous state plus the messages. Now we can destructure from messages at the position 0 like this. Remember that messages it's an array. So we are gonna grab the first message, which is the one that we just sent, and we're gonna add it to the Firebase database. So we can say add doc. Add doc is gonna take a collection, and collection is gonna take the database and the doc. Okay, we pass the format. We are specifying as well which table, in this case is gonna be chat, and we pass the ID created at the text and the author or user who sent this message. Now we can close these curly braces like this. We need to put this empty array because we are using callback. And now we can go here to the gifted chat return, and we can simply pass the messages and the function onSend. What do we want to do whenever the user sends a message? We can set the messages to be onSend like this. We're getting the message in a callback, and then we are sending it. All right, now we can say user, it's gonna be equal to _ID auth.currentuser.email. We are accessing the data of the authenticated user that we have. So this way, Gifted Chat knows which messages render to the right and blue and which messages render to the left and gray. We can specify the avatar. As you can see, this is gonna be a random avatar, and I'm pasting this link here. And now let's try to fix this error. If I go here to my use layout effect, as you can see, this is wrong. We don't need that ref. We just need to say collection order by. Now let's go back to the chat, and it's working perfectly. Nice. Now we can just try to see if this is working. I guess it seems that it's pretty much all we need in order to have this functionality working. Gifted Chat as well, I invite you to check their documentation because they have a bunch of properties that you can add here and a lot of customization. We can as well change the messages container style. I'm gonna say background colors white because I want it to be white, but you can change it for whatever you want. Now let's try to send a message. I'm gonna just write some random things and press send. And as you can see, we have this real-time functionality, and I'm gonna go ahead and enter to the chat screen in my other iPhone. And we are going to see that we have this message. So as simple as that, guys. Let's try to send a reply from this device. Hit send, and we have that real-time functionality. We are getting the message instantly in the iPhone 13. As you can see, guys, this is super easy to implement. It's not that hard, and because we are using Gifted Chat, we are showing the messages super quickly. We do not have to worry about the style, about who's sending what, and all that. We just have to pass the array of messages to the Gifted Chat component, and the Gifted Chat component is gonna handle everything. Now let's go back to Firebase console, and as you can see, we have here in the collections, the chat collections, and each collection or each document, it's a message that has these properties. And you can pretty much see exactly what you have in your database. And this is pretty much all I wanted to show you guys. Remember, if you want to download this project or the design for this project, go to codewithbeto.dev and you can check out this project. Don't forget to like this video, leave a comment if you want, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.